welcome everybody to Lunch and Learn today, and we are really thrilled to have the President of the Rabbinic Council of the United Synagogue, or the Chair of the Rabbinic Council of the United Synagogue, Rabbi Nicky Liss, who, as well as being an outstanding chair who has provided real leadership at a very difficult time to our community, is an outstanding and upstanding fellow. He's given great chizuk to his congregation. He's given great chizuk to the rabbinate. He's also given great personal chizuk to me. It is always, always a pleasure to host him, and we cherish all the good work he does. And we look forward to listening to him this afternoon on ethical and halachic issues surrounding the COVID-19 vaccine, and also a couple of thoughts about our lamented great rabbi and teacher, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. So over to you, Rabbi Liss.
Thank you, Rabbi Lawrence, for those kind words. And to echo working as a rabbi through these times is quite challenging. It's great to have colleagues to bounce ideas off and to get support and chizuk from. And right at the beginning of the pandemic, people can remember that far back, Rabbi Lawrence came up with the most wonderful idea for supporting the rabbis, which we've done ever since, and that was to hold a weekly call somewhat like this. It's now, Baruch Hashem, it's not as needed, so it's a bit more spaced out, but it was an incredible idea, which is the whole entire rabbinate has benefited from. So an opportunity to thank Rabbi Lawrence for that and for everything else as well. And thank you everyone for joining. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces who I'm missing as we can't get together in shul at the moment together, but please God, I look forward to seeing you at Mincha Mariv on the 2nd of December or the 3rd of December, whenever the change takes place. I will come running. So I look forward to seeing you then. I did want to start, with everyone's permission, by saying a few words about Rabbi Sachs, given the feelings of devastation and of being bereft, which those feelings are only growing by the day. He charged us all with a mission. A number of missions, but one of which was the concept that our values, heritage, and way of life can provide a framework to face the challenges of the 21st century. He role modeled that, and through this, he gave everyone the confidence and courage to identify as Jewish, and something that we as Rabbonim have benefited from, because Rabbi Sachs was able to connect with parts of the community and beyond, and to bring them to our doors. And then we have the opportunity to work with them, and it's one of the many amazing attributes and facets of Rabbi Sachs's leadership. On a personal note, I have a tremendous amount of gratitude. He gave me advice, encouragement, guidance, the incredible ability of making everybody feel important when they walked into a room. And last night, when we reflected locally in Highgate, well, it wasn't really locally because it was online, but a local event, Shuli, my wife, spoke about his humility and his positivity, incredible attributes to emulate, particularly both of those, his humility, the desire to learn from every situation and learn from everybody, and his positivity. Despite whatever's going on in the world, he would always have a positive outlook and give hope and ask people to try and turn it to the positive. I say the word emulate because it's important to emulate and not imitate. Something I heard on a number of occasions from Rabbi Bernstein Zatzal, who you'll see here from my bar mitzvah, right next to me. That we see in the Aseret Dibros and the Ten Commandments, we say, "Lo yeh lecha Elohim achirim," shall not make yourself any other gods. Or so, "La sasa lecha fesel v'chol tzmuna," as well. So after that, it says, "Lo sasa lecha fesel v'chol tzmuna," you shouldn't make any graven images. "Asher b'shamayim ma'al v'asher ba'aretz mitachas," not in the heavens above and not in the ground below. And Rabbi Bernstein translated this or looked at this homiletically based on a comment of Rav Yosef Nechemia Kornitzer Zatzal, who was the last Rav of Krakow before the war, whose kever I've been to. And he said, "Lo saseh lecha fesel v'chol tzmuna," you should not make yourself into a carbon copy, into an image of anybody else. We're not here to imitate people, but rather we emulate them. And who do we emulate? And he says, Asher Bashamayim, when it comes to matters of heavenly matters, when it comes to ruchnius, mimal, emulate those who are greater than you. Asher Ba'aretz, when it comes to gashmus, when it comes to physical, earthly matters, mitachas, emulate those who have less than you. And so it's always important to emulate rather than to imitate. And just one final word here that I have said a lot and will say a lot. This paragraph from Rabbi Sachs, I think, really sums up our mission. And that is as follows. He says, our task is to be true to our faith and a blessing to others. A blessing to others because we are true to our faith. To be a Jew is to bring redemption one day at a time, one act at a time. Every mitzvah, every kind word or deed, every act of sharing what we have with others brings the divine presence into the world. By recognizing the image of God in other people, we help remake the world in the image of God. And I think that is a wonderful summary of what we all have the ability to do to make a difference. And Yehi Zichro Baruch, may his memory be a blessing, and may we be all encouraged to emulate him.
Amen.
So, again, thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you. And I'd like, as I have done in the past with Lunch and Learns, to make it an interactive session. So if you have any questions, please do raise your hands and we will discuss things. But I wanted to turn attention to a different aspect of the pandemic. We've noticed that the pandemic has raised some new questions. At the outset, we had to think about how we were going to handle lockdown and life cycle events, and of course, those go on. But now the questions are around reporting neighbours or others flouting rules to the police. Is that permitted or is that not in Jewish law? That's something we could discuss. And then there are a number of questions surrounding the vaccine. So the first thing I want to do, if it's here, have you put the poll there, Rabbi Lawrence?
It's up.
Excellent. So this is anonymous. Your answer. Huh?
Let me just resave it as anonymous. Hang on, I can do that.
Yeah, we won't see who's responded. So please look at the question on your screen and answer it, and then we will show the responses.
There's a few people with two.
There are two of us. Can we have two questionnaires, please? we don't have the same answer.
You cancel each other out. You need to log in separately to do that.
But I'll ask afterwards which one you did and which one you didn't, then we can adjust the statistics accordingly. Has one of you voted?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what is the answer of the other one without saying who it is?
One said straight away.
And one said 2 months.
Right, okay. And which one is reflected? Which of those two answers did you click?
Straight away, yeah. Have it straight away, we clicked.
I don't mind saying it was my wife that said it.
So it's
Anonymously.
okay. So can you publish the results, please, Rabbi Lawrence? I don't know if I can.
On the stick. What stick?
50-50.
You're not, Brian. You're not going to get paid for it. If that's what you're expecting.
It's not a case of being paid. It's a case of will they threaten us that if we don't have it, we can't return to anything vaguely resembling a normal life.
Well, I mean, I suspect on everything I've been reading, there will be things that are connected to the zoo. So it could be that you can't fly unless you can evidence that you've had the vaccine.
In which case, probably we will have the vaccine. But if it's a free choice, then my answer would be not to have it at all.
Excellent. So we've okay. Well, we may explore that in a moment, Brian. We may ask you to explain why that is, and we'll come to that. Okay. Do you want to? Can you display the result, please, or are you already? Because I'm not sure.
I thought I'm sharing the result there.
Oh, it is. Okay. It doesn't appear on my screen, I guess, because I'm a host.
All right. So it says if you're.
Oh yeah, we can see it.
It says got
Right,
it
okay,
straight
great. Thank
away,
you.
5, and wait and see for 2 months is also 5.
Well, that's going to be 6, as we've heard, and then we've got 1 not to have it at all unless told they can't fly. So
I'd just
okay.
like to interrupt irreverently with the fact that Dumbo clearly hasn't taken the vaccine.
Right. Thank you for that. Okay, so when it comes to the vaccine, there are a number of questions besides for would you take it or not. Can I ask you all to jump in and say what you think the ethical or halakhic questions around taking the vaccine might be? Or around the vaccine in general might be.
Well, I would see a halachic issue not taking it if you were out in the public domain quite a lot, or going to shul or going to meetings. If you would catch it, then you would be responsible for passing it on and possibly somebody dying as a result of you not being more cautious when you had the opportunity to be vaccinated.
Okay, thank you. That's a very important question.
I was wondering about the composition of the vaccine. You know, exactly what will be in it.
Okay, what's your concern?
Well, it depends what it's made of and what you're putting into your body, exactly what's in it, which I'd say is Brian's concern possibly as well. I'm not saying I wouldn't get it.
Please don't put words into my mouth. That's not my concern at all.
Okay, we'll find out in a moment what it might be, Brian. So what other? Okay, so the contents of the vaccine. Would anyone volunteer to be part of the trials to see if the vaccine works?
Same answer as before.
Mr. Collins, you put your hand up. So.
Absolutely. I want to get out of this being hemmed in the whole time. I want to have some way of getting through. So if I can help, in fact, I am part of a research project that's looking at the effect of wearing a mask or not wearing a mask in shul, being run by UCL. So, I'm very positive about trying to get everyone out of this.
Okay, thanks for that. So is it permissible in halacha to actually get involved in one of the trials? So wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, we'll see that's probably an easier ethical and halachic question than can you be infected with the disease to see if the vaccine works or not. So that might be one of the questions we have to deal with. If I were to ask you, if there's a limited supply of vaccines, how do we distribute it? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Because that's going to be another question that comes up over the and within that, does this country, if this country has a certain number of the vaccines because it can afford it, does the UK have a responsibility to ensure that poorer countries around the world can get access to it? Is that a question or not? Any thoughts on any of that?
I think morally it is a question, but it's also, one has to consider corruption. It's like when you give money to third world countries and you find that quite often, if you're following a particular project, that the people who are running the project were actually taking parts of that money for themselves. So it would be a good project to send out medics to poorer countries who couldn't afford it, knowing that all the money that one gave was being used for that.
So if you could trace it from right to the sort to the fact that it's used, the vaccine is used appropriately in a poorer country, but without that would be problematic, is what you're suggesting.
As long as I'll talk about my own point of view. If I was sure that it was going to be properly utilised, I think I think there should be a special tzedakah from a Jewish point of view for that, because after all, we have tzedakah for food, and food doesn't, when people don't have enough food, and we have tzedakahs for giving people a holiday when they can't afford a holiday if they have health issues. So we need to have a tzedakah for keeping people healthy and alive in some cases.
Okay, thank you for that. Barry, you've got your...
Yes. I, as we go back into sort of fairly deep lockdown, my children were again forbidden me to go shopping. And I feel quite bad about the fact that I have to be protected from the virus and they don't have to be protected from the virus. And I think the same applies to the vaccination. I'm quite well into the group by age that I'm going to be amongst the first to get it. And again, I'm happy to have it, but I'm not sure that I should be a priority, because I think that younger people have a much longer life ahead of them than I have, if I can put it that way. So I feel a little bit worried about on that issue.
Okay, no, thank you for that. So Brian, we haven't heard yet why you won't be taking the vaccine unless forced to.
For a number of reasons. Partly because we know that the development of a vaccine of this nature should normally take a number of years. This one has been generated in the space of a matter of months, and there must be question marks in most people's minds as to the extent and safety of the testing that has been done on it. We also know that insufficient research has yet been done into the extent to which people have natural, to which those who have previously been exposed to the virus may have natural immunity. And frankly, bearing in mind, I have, to my certain knowledge, been exposed closely to people who have subsequently, very shortly after that, had the virus, and I have not had it, raises questions in my mind as to whether I really want to take the risk of having something injected into me, which may not be safe. On the other hand, if I am blackmailed, as I suspect we will be, and we are going to be told that you want to get on a plane, you want to go to a theatre, you want to go to a football match, etc., unless you've got the vaccination certificate, forget it, then almost certainly I will acquiesce and have it. But it will not be willingly.
Okay, thank you for that.
And, I think one other point, as my wife has just said in agreement with Barry, if there is one group that desperately should be given this vaccine as an absolute matter of priority, it is the working population. Nobody else should be offered it, not in the short term, because the rest of us can look after ourselves. We need to get the working population back to work properly.
Okay, thank you for sharing your views on that, Brian. It's all helpful. We've got a range of views here. We can see from the poll as well. So some of you would jump and get the vaccine on day one. I haven't asked Rabbi Lawrence whether he would, but I certainly know what I would do, but I'll come to that. So yes, you've got your hand up. So
Shirley, right. So if I can just say, because when people have been talking now about whether they would have it or not, or whether we should, because we're older, let young people have it. Well, of course, there is the science that says that older people are less likely to cope with it and their immune system will be much more challenged. And also, the main thing here is to protect the NHS as well, because if, God forbid, all of us who are over a certain age, if we caught, we might be very, very ill and then have to go into hospital. And if the sort of percentage of our age group have to be taken into the NHS, then that really challenges the NHS. It means they have to cancel operations, they have to close wards and change them into more COVID wards, as was the case in April. So I'm not going to, if I'm offered it, I'm not going to say, we'll give it to a young person instead, because statistically young people cope with it much better, and in some cases they're even asymptomatic.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So I want to share a few thoughts. Let's share some history first of all, a scientific history lesson, and then we'll look at how halacha has looked at this. And much of this is based on the work of two doctors in Harvard Medical School, Sharon Galper Grossman and Rabbi Dr. Shammai Grossman, who've written a number of papers on this. And let's first go back to 1796, where in an attempt to identify an effective vaccine against smallpox, Edward Jenner conducted the first human challenge study. Now, the word challenge study is important because you'll hear this a lot in the press. Challenge study means that the person who volunteers that will actually be infected by the disease. So that's important. That's what a challenge study is. So Edward Jenner conducted the first human challenge study by inoculating a healthy 8-year-old with cowpox, a related but less virulent virus than smallpox, and subsequently exposing them to smallpox. Jenner confirmed that inoculation had protected the child from infection. Ironically, his experiment, which would probably be considered unethical today, gave birth to the field of virology, the discovery of vaccinations, and the eradication of smallpox. And although the history of vaccine, of human challenge trials is complex and fraught with examples of ethical conduct, more recent trials are subject to rigorous ethical standards and have substantially expedited and enhanced the efficacy and safety of vaccine development. Now, to minimize the risk to infected participants, researchers generally reserve such trials for diseases with a known cure, such as cholera or malaria. And of course, no such cure exists yet for COVID-19, rendering a human vaccine challenge trial even more dangerous for participants. So that's the first thing. So is it permitted for someone to volunteer to be part of the trial? I started with 1796, but I need to go back another 11 years to 1785, when a rabbi called Rabbi Avram Nunzig, who had lost 2 children from smallpox, he permitted a precursor to vaccination, and this intervention involved the deliberate infection of a healthy individual with smallpox, causing a mild form of disease that then created immunity. Though the procedure was associated with a 1 in 1,000 risk of death, he dismissed this danger because the risk of death from smallpox was far greater. And so he considered the treatment a mitzvah. And he cited the precedent from the Talmud, from Gemara, which talks of bloodletting. And bloodletting was permitted, even though it frequently caused fainting, it rarely resulted in death. And following 11 years later, following Edward Jenner's introduction of smallpox vaccination, the Tiferes Yisrael permitted a healthy individual to be vaccinated and achieve long-term immunity from the virus despite the risk. And he writes as follows, and I think these numbers are important. He wrote, "It appears that one may be vaccinated against smallpox, even though 1 in 1,000 people will die from the vaccination. The reason for this is that if one were to be struck by a natural case of smallpox, the danger would be even greater, and one may subject themselves to something that rarely leads to danger in order to avoid a more likely danger." And so going back 200 years, it was considered these nascent forms of vaccinations were permitted in halacha because they were considered less risky. The risk to life was less risky than it was to contract the virus when there was an epidemic going around. Of course, if there was no epidemic, if smallpox wasn't going around the community, then you've got to, why would someone go for the vaccination, which carries risk, and living normal life doesn't carry risk at all? So it's only when there was an enhanced risk, then the vaccination could be used. Moving to the modern times, Rav Asher Weiss, who's the head of a based in Yerushalayim, and who has been quite outspoken in the Haredi world in the importance of leading from the front and being safe in every area of life to fight against COVID-19. When talking about vaccination in general, I'll talk about what he says with regards to COVID-19 in a moment. But with regards to vaccination as in general, he brings a Gemara which talks about a Roman official who accused the Jewish community of murdering the emperor's daughter and threatened mass execution unless the guilty party confessed. To save the community, 2 members of the community falsely confessed to this. And so they were executed, and the rest of the community was spared as a result. Rav Weiss concludes that an individual who gives their life to save the community has a direct path to Gan Eden. He states that when a nation is at war, there are unique rules of Pekuach Nefesh, the obligation to save a life. To win, the nation requires the self-sacrifice of not only its soldiers, but all those who fill essential life-saving roles, such as police officers, firefighters, security guards, and doctors. And moving forward to the pandemic, he writes that in the midst of a pandemic that has infected over 13 million people and led to the death over the numbers have gone up since, of 500,000 worldwide, one may reasonably conclude that we are at war with COVID-19, and therefore some of the principles of war are at play. Interesting enough, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was one of the great halachists of the second half of the 20th century, I was in Yerushalayim in March 1995 when he passed away, and attended his levaya with over 300,000 other people. It was an extraordinary experience to see the streets of Yerushalayim closed for a levaya of one of the great Gedolim. Anyway, he writes, when asked about participating in trials for vaccination, he makes the comparison. He talks about the concept of going to war in Judaism. He speaks about the concept of Mechemes Rishus, which is an optional war, where the Jewish people, the king cannot take the Jewish people to war unless he has the backing of the Sanhedrin. But when it comes to Mechemes Mitzvah, a war of obligation, he says there everyone is, unless they have exemption, everyone is obligated to get involved. And he talks about the fight against disease. Some people may see the comparison to war unhelpful, but he, using a halachic precedent, uses the fight against disease, compares that to war, and therefore encourages people to get involved. However, I think it's important to know that we don't ever obligate someone to do something like that if there is a threat to their own health. Let me just bring this up. Where did I write this? So it seems that the majority of halachic opinions seem to permit, but certainly do not obligate participation in trials. One, because a healthy individual may incur a small risk of death to achieve long-term immunity. Secondly, is compared to the risk permitted for other acts of altruism, such as kidney donation, which again can never be obligated, but it's a tremendous mitzvah and permitted in halacha should a person choose to do so. And three, the potential benefit to society is immeasurable, and therefore, and given the balance of risks, there certainly is a mitzvah to get involved in trials for the vaccination. But there can never be an obligation for something like that. And Rabbi Weiss goes on to talk about the social good and benefit to society that can benefit from a vaccine that works, and so that's why he and others are so in favor of this. I'm going to pause there for a second before I move on to the next question. Does anyone have any comments, questions about getting involved in vaccination trials? I mean, and also given, I should point out that when it comes to vaccination trials, we're talking about they will only take a certain section of the society. People have to be a particular age, a particular health, no other issues, which then will lead to scientific questions about, okay, so what's that tell us about the more vulnerable population, about how the vaccine works, but I'll leave that to them to explain. But in terms of, so given that, any questions about this so far?
Rabbi Liss, presumably, though, they do have to test it on older people, because one of the things that's come up about these recent vaccines, which they're very hopeful for, is do they protect older people? And that's obviously a key question. So surely they can only determine that by having some older, but perhaps not so older, but not vulnerable people to participate in the trials.
I don't know the answer to that question. Does anybody happen to know that? Know the answer to that? Nope, so something we'll have to look at. That's something I was unclear of. Johnny, were you going to say something? You've got a medical expert on the call.
Hardly medical, but the latest news flash I had about an hour ago was that the virus results, or the COVID vaccine results, show a 94% success against over 65s.
Okay, that's fascinating. So I guess they must have tried. They must, in some way, have been doing the trials. But
the results of the trials are continuing to come out, and the problem always is that until they've proven the efficacy of the particular vaccine against different age groups and different degrees of vulnerability, it's very difficult for anybody to make a decision as to how they want to proceed. It depends on individual circumstances.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And of course, we're seeing initial, whatever stage we're up to, third stage trials. The vaccines won't be, well, one would hope that the vaccines won't be approved until they pass all the various tests and we have all the data. So they're not talking about releasing it next week. They've still got data, and we're all looking forward to the results of the Oxford trial as well, which are due to come out next week, I believe.
If they pass the government tests and the nice tests or whatever, isn't it pikuach nefesh?
Isn't what pikuach nefesh? So that's the next question about does one have to have the vaccine? I've been asking up to now, asked everyone if they would, but I've been asking everyone up to now whether about the halachot of getting involved in the trials. My next question is, do we have an obligation to vaccinate to protect others? And that's exactly what, Richard, what you're asking. Do we then have a halachic obligation? Let's say it is released, it passed all the tests. Do we then have to queue up to get the vaccination if we fall in the category of getting it? So that's going to be a question. But here, the country is trying to protect people first, but by protecting people, you protect others. Although there is also, I heard someone from Pfizer ask this question last week, and they weren't clear. I wasn't clear on their answer. There are two ways the vaccine can work. The vaccine can prevent someone from getting the disease in the first place, or getting the contracting it, and therefore they won't be able to pass it on to anyone else. Or does the vaccination work in a way that it prevents a person from getting the illness, being ill, but they could still pass it on? And that's going to be an important difference when we know. And I suspect different vaccines are going to work in different ways. That's going to be a really, really important factor in all of these discussions. Any other comments up to this point? Well, I've only got 8 minutes left, but I will.
This is a huge question that you just pointed out, and probably they could answer it now. They could probably.
Well, they didn't answer it last week when they were asked the question.
Well, a week's a long.
That's true. A week is a very long time in this day and age. But I do want to. I'll share a few other thoughts with you before we finish. In 1896, an Orthodox Jew was imprisoned in London for refusal to vaccinate his child. And the then chief rabbi testified that vaccination is in perfect consonance with the letter and spirit of Judaism. I tried to find, this is Professor Steinberg, who you all know, and I know has a wonderful relationship with Rabbi Lawrence and therefore the community, and writes about this. I've seen it sourced, but I can't find it. The source I was given is not the same, doesn't relate to it. So I'm trying to look that case up. And other things, people have asked, what about the contents of the vaccine? So one of the challenges there, what if it has a non-kosher ingredient? And actually this question, for anyone who has children or grandchildren in primary school, you would know this question from the annual flu vaccine, where in primary school children, they don't give a jab, but rather give a nasal spray. And that nasal spray has some pork in it, or certainly some pig contents in it. And I was phoned by my children's school last year to ask if that was an issue, and the answer is no, it's not. The Achi Ezer of Chaim Ozer Grudzinski writes about this, one of the great Gedolim before the Second World War. He notes that the prohibition against eating non-kosher food only applies to food that is swallowed, not anything that is injected or given in any other way.
Is that agreed by everybody?
Yeah. Yes. There's going to be a question about, no, Brian disagrees. You just said no.
On the basis that there is bound to be a Rov somewhere who takes a different view.
Yeah, no, you may have anti-vaxxers, but I don't think that's not the reason they're anti-vaxxers. But certainly I don't want to give any impression that that's anti-vaxxers is part of normative Judaism. But it was raised, actually, I was on a call this morning with a very faith forum, and one of the Catholics on the call raised an issue about the use of fetal parts for medicinal purposes. This is why when George W. Bush was the president of the United States, as a devout Catholic, America fell behind the world in stem cell research. But this is one of the few areas and given the halachic consensus on this, is one of the reasons that Israel is one of the world leaders on stem cell research, because from whichever start you want to, from the least religious to the most religious part of Israeli society, everyone is in favor of stem cell research, whether it's from a halachic or an ethical or a moral standpoint. So there was never ever any politics over it in the Knesset to prevent quick adoption and going forward with that. And that's something actually I've heard Professor Steinberg speak about a lot. And he, given his role in Israeli society, played a big role in pushing that forward. So that's not going to be a challenge. And the vast majority of poskim are talk about the importance of taking vaccines to protect others. But the question is, at what point would they say that? So here, as Brian notes, this has been done very quickly, although in a slight change, the world is moving very quickly in scientific research. We have computers, the power of which are extraordinary. I remember when I was studying for my chemistry degree in the late 90s, the way that computers have developed just in the 20 years since then, the power of computation. I remember doing experiments where you filled in the data onto Excel, and then you want to extrapolate it for tens of thousands of times that to work out how things work. That even then it was powerful, and you think now 25 years later, the power of computers to extrapolate data and work things out will naturally speed up everything that's going to be done. So I think that there's going to be an automatic speeding up of the vaccination process, but at the same time, we need to keep a close eye on how things are approved. And just one final thing about, there are different types of approval. There's the general approval, which it may get, or there's the emergency approval that the Americans are now pushing for. The emergency approval, where I've got it written down, the exact statistics of this. So I think for emergency approval, it only has to, if I'm not mistaken, we can all look this up. It only has to have a 30% efficacy rate to get emergency approval, whereas for full approval, it has to have a much, much higher one. I can't find the statistic here, but I do have it somewhere. So
well, I mean, the flu vaccine reportedly only has 50% efficacy rate, and that's been in use for years and years. And these new ones, they claim, are 90% or 94.5%.
Yes, a good point, David. And the question is balancing that. What is the risk? What is the risk involved in taking the flu jab? So, I'm not sure. You've got to balance what. So the question is the efficacy rate versus what the risk you are balanced against it. So when we spoke about smallpox 200 years ago, the risk was death. And you had to, so what is the risk of these COVID vaccines? We don't know. But certainly if they pass the proper threshold here, as soon as I qualify for the vaccine, I will be running to have my own, but understand I won't. And I do believe there is if we want the society to get the real form of herd immunity, the only way to do that is by the vast majority of community, of society getting vaccinated. And that naturally puts an end to, once you hit a certain percentage, that will herald the end of COVID-19, everyone being able to go back to work, everyone being able to go back to live normally. And so once it's proven safe, I do believe there is a halachic imperative to get vaccinated. The question is, when are we convinced that it is safe? And we'll just follow the news and follow the science on that one. So we've discussed getting involved in the challenge trials. We've discussed getting vaccinated. The distribution of it, we'll have to wait for another time. So I leave it over there. So it's now 1:45.
Thank you very much indeed, Rabbi Liss. And just put behind me the backdrop, I've removed the one of Gilray's anti-vax cartoon from 1802 and the old cowpox background. This is the advertisement for tomorrow evening's memorial for Rabbi Sacks on US TV. And that's at 8 o'clock tomorrow evening. And you can watch it live at www.theus.tv. It's possible Rabbi Liss has got more information than that.
No, that is the link. It should be a very special evening of reflections and contributions, and 8 o'clock tomorrow night.
So please do join us for that, and thank you very much indeed, Rabbi Liss, for a fascinating shiur and also everything that you're doing for the community. I look forward to seeing you this evening.
Love to see everyone, and I look forward to seeing you all back in shul, please God.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much. Thank you.